The morning light came slow over the Texas hill country, the way it always did in late September, thin and golden, stretching long shadows across the cracked earth like fingers reaching for something they could never quite touch. The mesquite trees along the fence line stood still. No wind, just the quiet that had settled over the Callahan Ranch like a second skin over the past 3 years. Thick and heavy and impossible to shake. Robert Bobby Callahan woke at 5:15, the same as every morning, without an alarm. His body had learned that rhythm decades ago, back when the ranch had cattle to tend, horses to feed, and a woman beside him who would groan softly and pull the quilt over her shoulder while he slipped out of bed. He still slept on his side of the mattress. The other half remained undisturbed, the pillow still holding faintly, or so he imagined, the shape of Donna's head. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, his thick hands braced on his knees. 71 years old today. The thought arrived without ceremony. He stood, pulled on his work pants out of habit. There wasn't much work left on the ranch anymore, hadn't been for 2 years, and walked barefoot across the wooden floor to the kitchen. The boards creaked in the same 3 places they always had, once near the bedroom door, once in the hallway beside the framed photograph of him and Donna at the State Fair of Texas in 1987, and once just before the kitchen threshold. He never fixed those creaks. They were part of the house's voice now. He filled the percolator with water, measured out the coffee by eye. 4 scoops, no more, no less, and set it on the burner. Then he turned on the radio. George Strait's voice filled the kitchen. "I can still make Cheyenne." Bobby leaned against the counter with his arms folded and stared out the window at the pale light spreading over the pasture. The old water trough near the barn had a crack in it he kept meaning to fix. The cedar post on the south fence was leaning. Small things, things that used to matter more when there was a reason to keep everything sharp and right. He opened the cabinet and took out a single mug, a ceramic one, blue with a chip on the rim that Donna had refused to throw away. Because, she said, everything useful had a scar somewhere. He poured the coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table, which seated 4, but had only ever needed 1 setting for a long time now. On the table, beside the salt shaker and a stack of unopened mail, sat a small note card, yellowed at the edges. The handwriting on it was round and deliberate, Donna's handwriting, in blue ballpoint ink that had faded just slightly over the years. German chocolate birthday cake, 2 cups flour, 1 TSP baking soda, 1 to a 2 TSP salt. He didn't read the rest. He knew it by heart. He just needed to see it there, the same way some people needed a photograph. Today was the day she always made the cake. Every year, without fail since 1978, the first birthday they spent together as a couple, when they were barely 25 and renting a small house near Hondo with a kitchen so narrow you had to turn sideways to pass each other. She'd made that cake in a borrowed pan and forgotten to grease it properly, and half the cake had stuck to the bottom. And they'd laughed so hard that Bobby had knocked over a glass of sweet tea, and Donna had laughed even harder. He hadn't had the cake since she died. The percolator sputtered. Outside, a mockingbird started up somewhere in the pecan tree. The light kept spreading. Bobby Callahan sat with his coffee and his silence, and the handwriting of a woman who had been gone for 3 years. And he breathed in and out, and the radio played on. He didn't expect a call from Cheryl. He hadn't expected one on his last birthday either. And he'd been right. She'd sent a card, store-bought, generic, the kind that said, "Wishing you a wonderful day," in a font that had never once been sincere. He'd put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a Texas star, and left it there until it curled at the corners. He wasn't angry at his daughter. That was the thing people didn't understand when he tried to explain it. And so he'd mostly stopped trying. He wasn't angry. He was something quieter than anger, and much heavier. A kind of deep, settled sorrow that had no sharp edges left, only weight. Cheryl had moved to Nashville 8 years ago for her ex-husband's music career, and when the marriage fell apart 3 years later, she'd stayed anyway. Built a life there. A good life, by her own account, though Bobby had seen very little of it. She had not come home when Donna was in hospice. She had called. She had cried on the phone. She had said she was trying to get a flight, and that Tyler's school had a mandatory event, and that the timing was impossible. Bobby had listened to all of it standing in the hospital hallway under a flickering fluorescent light. And when she finished, he had said, "All right, Cheryl." And he had gone back to sit beside Donna's bed and hold her hand until it went still. He didn't tell Cheryl what time it happened. He let her find out through his neighbor, Patsy Howell, the following morning. He wasn't sure, even now, whether that had been cruelty or simple exhaustion. Probably both. He was too old to untangle it cleanly. The phone rang at 8:45. The landline, he still had one, still used it, saw no reason to change. "Daddy," Cheryl's voice, careful and practiced, the way it always was when she was navigating something she'd rehearsed. "Cheryl," he said, "happy birthday." A beat. "I wanted to call first thing." "It's fine. How are you feeling?" 71. That's a big one. Bobby looked out the window. The light was full now, bright and flat. "Feels about the same as 70, he said. She laughed softly. It sounded genuine enough. "I guess it would." Another beat. "Tyler wanted me to wish you happy birthday too. He drew you something. I'm going to mail it this week, I promise." He doesn't have to do that. He wanted to. Tyler was 15 now. Bobby had last seen him in person 2 Christmases ago. A tall, quiet kid with Cheryl's dark eyes and a politeness that seemed sincere rather than performed, which Bobby appreciated. They'd played checkers for an hour one afternoon without saying much, which had been one of the more comfortable hours Bobby could remember from that visit. "Tell him thank you," Bobby said. "I will." The pause that followed had a texture to it, full of something unsaid, something Cheryl was deciding whether to release or hold back. Bobby waited. He was good at waiting. "Daddy," she said finally, "are you doing anything today? For your birthday?" Patsy Howell said she might bring a pie over later. "That's nice of her. She's a good neighbor." Is there anything you want? Anything you need?" Bobby looked at the note card on the table, at the precise faded loops of Donna's handwriting. "No," he said. "I've got everything I need." He could hear her breathing on the other end. A car passed somewhere in the background on her end. Nashville traffic, probably. Some distant ordinary Tuesday in a life that was hers alone. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, Daddy. I love you." "Love you too," he said. Because it was true, even when it was hard, which was most of the time. After he hung up, he sat for a long time with his hand still resting on the receiver. Dale Whitmore called at 10:30, and the sound of his voice was an entirely different experience, ragged and immediate, and not rehearsed at all. "Bobby Ray Callahan, you old piece of barbed wire. Happy birthday." Bobby felt something loosen in his chest. "Dale, 71. Lord have mercy. I remember when you turned 30, and you thought that was the end of the world. I was right." Dale laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere below the ribs. Dale Whitmore had been Bobby's closest friend since the 7th grade. When they'd sat next to each other in Mrs. Patterson's math class in Uvalde and discovered they were both more interested in the AM radio station drifting in through the classroom window than in long division. They'd grown up together, worked cattle together, played guitar badly together in Dale's father's barn on Friday nights. Dale had gone on to work in the music industry in a roundabout way. Not as a performer, but as a producer and studio coordinator, first in San Antonio and eventually in Nashville, where, by remarkable coincidence or the peculiar gravity of small-town connections, he had ended up living 20 minutes from Bobby's daughter. "How's the ranch?" Dale asked. "Still standing?" "That's more than most things can say." His voice shifted slightly, lighter but pointed. "You doing anything today?" "Patsy Howell's bringing a pie." "A pie? Jesus! A man turns 71 in Texas and all he gets is a neighbor pie." "It's a good pie," Bobby said. "She makes a pecan pie that would make you religious." "I believe it." Dale paused. Then, "Bobby, I want to come out this weekend. Would that be all right? I'll drive down from San Antonio. I've got a meeting there Thursday anyway." "You don't need to do that." "I know I don't need to. I want to." "Big difference. Can I come?" Bobby looked out at the pasture, the lean cedar post on the south fence, the cracked trough. "Sure," he said. "Come on out." "Good. Saturday morning. I'll bring something. Not a pie, something better." "What does that mean?" "It means don't ask questions and let an old man do something nice for his oldest friend." Bobby almost smiled. Almost. "All right, Dale." After he hung up with Dale, the house was quiet again, except for the radio. A different George Strait song now. Something older, slower. Bobby refilled his coffee and stood at the back door, looking out at the land that had been in his family since his father's time. The mesquites, the dry grass, the big sky going blue and permanent in all directions. Donna used to stand right here in the mornings, right in this doorway, coffee in one hand, the other hand on the doorframe, looking out at exactly this view. "You think it gets more beautiful every year?" she'd said once. "Or do you think it's that we get more grateful for it?" He hadn't had an answer then. He didn't have one now. He just stood there. And the land lay still, and the radio played on, and the day that was supposed to be a birthday rolled forward the same as any other day, slow and certain and full of a weight that had no name. What Bobby Callahan did not know, what he could not have known, standing there in his back doorway with a chipped blue mug and the habit of a grief he'd learned to carry, was that 270 miles away, in a neighborhood just east of downtown Nashville, his daughter was sitting at a kitchen table with her laptop open and her hands shaking. She had been shaking since 7 in the morning. On the screen in front of her was an email thread. Professional, carefully worded, the kind of correspondence that moved through publicists and coordinators and personal assistants like water, through a system of filters before it ever got close to the person at the center of it all. The thread had started 6 weeks ago with what Cheryl had assumed was a completely hopeless longshot. A message she'd sent to a general inquiry address she'd found on a management company's website, typed at 11:30 at night, after 2 glasses of wine and a long cry she hadn't fully let herself finish. She had written about her father, about the ranch in Uvalde, about Donna, about the radio that played George Strait every morning in a kitchen where now only 1 cup of coffee got poured. She had written more honestly than she'd written anything in years. More honestly, she realized afterward, than she'd spoken to her father in nearly a decade. She had not expected a response. She had sent it the way you drop a note into the ocean, not because you believe it will reach anyone, but because you need to release it. 6 weeks later, here was the response that had arrived in her inbox at 6:53 that morning. 3 words in the subject line that had made her press both hands flat against the table to steady herself. "We can do this." She read the email again and again, and then she picked up her phone and called Dale Whitmore. He answered on the first ring. "I know," he said, before she could speak. "I just got the same email." "Dale." Her voice cracked straight down the middle. "Dale, this is actually happening." "It's actually happening," he said, and she could hear that he was smiling. Smiling the way old men smile when something exceeds what they thought the world was still capable of. Now listen to me carefully, because we've got a lot of work to do and about 10 days to do it in. And your daddy cannot know a single word of this. Not one word. Can you do that? Cheryl looked at the email on her screen. She thought about her father's voice on the phone that morning, the flatness of it, the practiced composure, the quiet that lived behind every syllable. She thought about the 3 years of distance, and the phone call she hadn't made from the hospital, and the store-bought birthday card that had said, "Wishing you a wonderful day." She thought about the German chocolate cake recipe in Donna's handwriting, yellowed on the kitchen table of a ranch house where the radio played George Strait, and one chair stayed empty. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." The thing about Nashville was that it never stopped moving. Cheryl Callahan Reed had learned that in the first year after the divorce, when the city had felt like a river she was treading water in, exhausting and relentless and indifferent, she'd built something stable eventually. A job she was good at coordinating logistics for a mid-sized event production company. A 2-bedroom house in East Nashville with a small porch where she kept too many plants. And a son who was, despite everything, turning into someone she genuinely liked. Tyler Reed was 15 and already taller than his father had ever been. He had Cheryl's dark eyes and a gravity beyond his age. Quiet in the way that some teenagers were quiet. Not out of shyness, but out of a preference for observation, for understanding what was actually happening in a room before deciding how to respond to it. He played guitar, acoustic, not electric, George Strait rather than Metallica, which had surprised Cheryl and made her laugh the first time she'd heard him picking out the chords to "Carrying Your Love With Me" in his bedroom. He had asked once, when he was 11, why they didn't go to Texas more often. Cheryl had said it was complicated. Tyler had looked at her with those observing eyes and said, "Is it because of what happened with Grandma?" And Cheryl had said yes, and then excused herself to cry in the bathroom for 15 minutes, which she suspected Tyler had known about and had the grace not to mention. She didn't hide everything from him. He was too perceptive for that, and she'd long since given up pretending the family dynamics were simpler than they were. But the plan, the email, Dale's coordination, the impossibility that was somehow becoming possible, that she kept entirely to herself, not because she didn't trust him, because she was afraid that if she said it out loud to anyone before it was real, the universe would notice and take it away. Dale called her Tuesday evening, 3 days after the birthday phone call. "All right," he said. He was in San Antonio. She could tell. She could hear the low, ambient noise of what sounded like a hotel bar in the background. "I talked to his coordinator again today. Everything's confirmed. Saturday the 29th. That gives us 10 days. How is it even? How did this happen, Dale?" She was on her porch with a glass of water, keeping her voice low, even though Tyler was inside with headphones on. "I mean, I know I sent the email, but I never actually thought, you want the honest version or the polished version?" "Honest? Your email was good, Cheryl. It was real. People in that industry, people at that level, they get 1,000 requests a week, most of them wanting something. Yours just wanted to give something to an old man who deserved it. That's different. That stands out." He paused. "Also, Bobby's been a George Strait fan for 40 years. There are people around this artist who take that kind of loyalty seriously. I'm not saying it was easy. His team worked hard to make the schedule bend, but it bent." Cheryl sat with that for a moment. The street was quiet. A neighbor's wind chimes moved in the small night breeze. "Does Bobby know you're involved?" she asked. "I told him I'm coming Saturday with something better than a pie. That's all he knows." A beat. You're going to be there too, Cheryl. I know. I'm serious. I need you there. Not just for this. For him. He needs to see you. She closed her eyes. The wind chimes again. I know, Dale. He doesn't talk about it, but it's in him. That business with the hospital. With Donna. Dale, I'm not judging you. I just need you to understand that walking in that door is going to matter as much as anything else that happens that day. Maybe more. Cheryl pressed her fingertips to the bridge of her nose. The guilt was not a new sensation. It had been with her for 3 years in a very specific form. Low and constant, like a hum from a machine in another room that you stopped consciously noticing, but that kept going regardless. It lived in the space between her ribcage and her stomach, and it tightened sometimes without warning, at ordinary moments, at the grocery store, in the middle of a work call, at night when Tyler was asleep, and the house was quiet enough for honesty. She had not been there when her mother died. No amount of reasonable explanation, the flight prices, Tyler's school event, the complexity of her work schedule at the time, had ever made the fact of it easier to carry. She had constructed justifications that were all technically true, and they had never once been enough. She knew it. Her father knew it. Neither of them had said it directly, because some things in Texas families got carried in silence rather than spoken. And both of them were their father's children in that regard. I'll be there, she said quietly. I'm driving down Friday night with Tyler. Good. Dale's voice softened. It's going to be all right, Cheryl. I really believe that. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Tell me the logistics. Walk me through everything. Over the next week, the plan took shape the way complex things always did. Through dozens of small decisions, adjustments, and moments of controlled panic. The location would be the ranch itself. His coordinator had been specific about this. It needed to feel like something genuine, not a staged event, not a crowd, not cameras and lights. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen the way real things happened, in an ordinary place, with the people who mattered, on a day that was already significant for its own reasons. Dale handled the logistics on the Texas end, coordinating quietly with Bobby's neighbor Patsy Howell, who turned out to be an absolutely invaluable co-conspirator. Patsy was 68, sharp as a new fence wire, and had been trying to find a way to do something meaningful for Bobby since Donna's funeral. When Dale called her and explained, there was a silence on her end that lasted almost 5 full seconds. And then she said, in a very controlled voice, Dale Whitmore, if you are not telling me the truth right now, I will drive to San Antonio and find you personally. Dale assured her he was telling the truth. Patsy then proceeded to take over approximately 60% of the logistical planning, which Dale gratefully allowed. She would handle the cake. This had been Cheryl's idea, proposed in a late-night phone call that had left both of them crying in a way neither of them acknowledged afterward. The German chocolate cake, Donna's recipe, the one on the yellowed note card in the kitchen. Patsy would make it. She'd seen Donna make it 3 times over the years. She didn't have the exact recipe, but Cheryl did. She'd photographed the note card 2 Christmases ago on the visit where she and Tyler had played checkers with Bobby. A quiet act of preservation she hadn't quite understood her own motivation for at the time. She texted the photo to Patsy on a Wednesday afternoon. Patsy didn't respond in words. She just sent back a single heart emoji, which from a 68-year-old woman in Uvalde, Texas, was the equivalent of a full paragraph. Tyler found out on Thursday. Not because Cheryl told him, though she'd been on the verge of it twice, but because he found the email thread open on her laptop when he came downstairs for a glass of water at 11:15 at night, and she'd fallen asleep on the couch with the laptop still open on the coffee table. She woke to the sound of Tyler saying her name very quietly. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with the laptop in his hands, screen facing her, the email thread clearly visible. Cheryl sat up fast. "Tyler!" "Mom." His voice was different, not accusatory, something more complicated than that. He sat down on the edge of the couch beside her and turned the laptop so they were both looking at it. "Is this real?" "It's real. George Strait, at Grandpa's ranch." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. "Does Grandpa know?" "No. It's a surprise." Tyler nodded slowly. In that way he had, processing things from the outside in, taking a full measure before responding. "When are we going?" "We drive down Friday, you and me." "Okay." He handed the laptop back to her. Then, quietly, "Mom." "This is a really good thing you're doing." She looked at him. This tall, careful, observing child who had her eyes and nobody's heartbreak yet. Or at least, nobody's that he was showing her. "I should have done something good a long time ago," she said. Tyler considered that. "Maybe. But you're doing it now." She didn't cry in front of him. She waited until he'd gone back upstairs, until she'd heard his bedroom door close. And then she sat in the blue dark of her living room with the laptop closed on her lap and let herself feel the full weight of what was coming. The gratitude, and the fear, and the grief, and the hope, all pressed together, inseparable and specific. The way things got when they finally mattered enough to hurt. Bobby noticed that something was different about Patsy on Friday afternoon, though he couldn't have said precisely what it was. She came by at 3 o'clock under the pretense of returning a casserole dish she'd borrowed in July, a purpose so transparently thin that Bobby, who was nobody's fool, noted it with mild amusement and said nothing. She was moving with a kind of contained energy, her eyes doing something he recognized as the look people wore when they were keeping a pleasant secret. He'd seen it on Donna plenty of times. He'd never been good at the keeping secrets part himself, but he'd always been good at recognizing it in others. "You all right, Patsy?" he asked, when she lingered at the kitchen door longer than a returned casserole dish required. "Fine as I can be," she said, with precisely too much brightness. "Just checking on you. Birthday boy." Birthday was Monday. Birthdays last all week. That's what my mother always said. He looked at her steadily. She returned the look with great determination. "Dale's coming tomorrow," Bobby said. "You know that?" "Is he? That'll be nice." "He said he's bringing something better than pie." "Is that right?" Patsy's expression did not change by a single muscle, which was itself the tell. Bobby filed it away. "Patsy," he said. "Bobby." "All right," he said. "You have a good evening." "You too." She picked up the casserole dish. "Don't stay up too late listening to the radio." "I go to bed at 9 o'clock, like a reasonable person." 9:15, she said, and she was smiling as she went down the porch steps. And the smile had something in it that Bobby sat with for a long while after she'd gone. Something that felt, against all his careful management of expectations, like the faintest edge of anticipation. He went inside. The radio was playing. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the note card on the table and the single cup in the drying rack, and the late afternoon light falling long and golden through the window over the sink. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but after 3 years of nothing much coming at all, he recognized the feeling, faint and tentative as it was. The way a man who's spent a long drought recognizes the smell of rain in the air before the first cloud appears. He stood in the kitchen and listened to the radio, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't entirely mind not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Cheryl and Tyler left Nashville at 6 in the morning. The car was a 4-year-old Subaru Outback with a crack in the rear bumper that Cheryl kept meaning to fix, and a back seat that Tyler occupied with his long legs extended sideways, and his acoustic guitar case taking up the remaining space. She hadn't told him to bring it. He'd simply loaded it without comment, which she'd decided to take as a sign. The first hour was quiet. Tennessee rolled past in its pre-dawn gray, the streetlights going off in sequence, the trucks already moving on the interstate, the dark shapes of trees beginning to separate from the sky as the light built up slowly in the east. Cheryl drove and Tyler slept, or at least kept his eyes closed. She was never entirely sure with him which was which. She had her coffee in the cup holder and a playlist running low through the speakers. George Strait, inevitably, which she hadn't done consciously, but which seemed correct regardless. The Chair, then Easy Come Easy Go, then Oceanfront Property. Songs she'd grown up with, songs that had played in her father's truck and her father's kitchen and the cab of her father's tractor on the few occasions she'd ridden along as a child. Back when things were simpler, or when she'd been too young to understand that they weren't. She thought about the first time she'd understood, genuinely understood, how much her father loved George Strait. She'd been about 12. It was a Saturday, and Bobby had come in from the fields earlier than usual and sat down at the kitchen table with a Lone Star beer, which meant it was a harder day than usual. And Donna had turned the radio up without being asked, because she always knew what he needed before he could say it. Ace in the Hole had come on, and Bobby had closed his eyes and sat very still, and Cheryl had watched him from the doorway, surprised by the expression on his face. Not sadness exactly, but something adjacent to it, something open. She hadn't seen his face do that very often. She'd asked her mother about it later. Donna had said, "Some people have a piece of music that speaks for them, says what they can't say themselves. Your father has always been a man who feels things very deeply and doesn't have an easy time putting words to it. George Strait does that for him. Always has." Cheryl had been 12 and had not fully understood. She was 39 now and understood it entirely. Tyler woke somewhere in Middle Tennessee, stretched his neck, and looked out the window at the early light now full and clear across the highway. "What are we listening to?" he asked. "George Strait." "Good call." He looked at her. "How are you doing?" "Ask me again in 8 hours." He nodded and said nothing more, which was exactly the right response. They stopped for gas and breakfast in Jackson, Tennessee, a diner attached to a filling station that had the specific, comfortable shabbiness of a place that had been exactly the same for 30 years and intended to remain so. A woman named Carol, according to her name tag, brought them eggs and biscuits and coffee with the wordless efficiency of someone who had served 1,000 Friday morning highway travelers and would serve 1,000 more. Cheryl ate and looked at her phone. Dale had texted at 7:30. "Everything on track. See you tomorrow morning. Bobby doesn't suspect a thing, I think." She typed back, "You think?" His response came 30 seconds later. "Patsy says he looked at her a little funny yesterday, but he can't know." He'd shut it down. She knew that was true. Bobby Callahan's default response to being made the center of attention, especially emotional attention, was a polite but absolute refusal. He'd done it at his own retirement party. He'd done it at Donna's memorial, standing at the back of the room in the funeral home with his arms crossed and his eyes clear, accepting handshakes from 40 years' worth of neighbors and acquaintances with brief, flat thank yous that communicated love and unbearable pain in equal measure to anyone paying close attention, which Cheryl had been. The idea of telling him in advance that George Strait was coming to his ranch would have produced an immediate and genuine rejection, not because he wouldn't want it, but because he was constitutionally incapable of receiving that kind of love without flinching. The surprise was the only way. "Mom," Tyler said, dipping a corner of biscuit in the yolk of his egg, "can I ask you something?" Sure. When we get there, when it happens, are you going to talk to him? Like, actually talk to him? Not just about the thing with George Strait, but about the other stuff. Cheryl looked at her son. Carol, the waitress, moved past them with a coffee pot. I have to, she said. I know. I just wanted to make sure you knew you had to. When did you get so direct? I've always been direct, Tyler said. You just don't usually ask. Cheryl looked at him for a long moment. This 15-year-old kid with the observing eyes who had somehow, in the middle of an ordinary adolescence, developed a precision about human things that made her simultaneously proud and slightly unnerved. You're right, she said. I don't usually ask. You should. She nodded. Noted. He went back to his biscuit. Grandpa's going to be okay, he said casually, as though it were a simple logistical fact rather than the thing she'd been afraid to assume for 3 years. He's tough, and he loves you. He just doesn't know how to show it when he's hurt. He's not the only one, Cheryl said quietly. Tyler looked at her, and the look was brief and complete, and did not need anything added to it. They paid the check and got back on the road. The landscape changed the way Texas changed. Gradually, then definitively. The green and moisture of Tennessee gave way to Arkansas's flatter middle ground, then to the specific quality of Texas light that was different from any other state's light. Harder, more direct, less apologetic. By the time they crossed into Texas proper, the sky had gone enormous, and the mesquite had started appearing along the road, and the radio was still playing. They'd gone from Strait to a broader country playlist, and then Cheryl had put George Strait back on specifically, deliberately, because it felt right. And Tyler was strumming quietly on his guitar in the back seat, working something out. Cheryl didn't ask what he was playing. She just drove. The hill country rose around them in the afternoon. Limestone bluffs and live oaks, and the specific pale green of Texas hill grass in September. Dry, but not defeated. She'd grown up in this landscape. She'd spent 20 years of her adult life trying to get distance from it and its associations, and somewhere in the middle of the drive, in the low afternoon light, she understood, not for the first time but more completely than before, that the distance hadn't worked. You couldn't get distance from the place that made you any more than you could get distance from your own skeleton. She called her father at 4 o'clock. Hey, Daddy. Cheryl. The same careful voice. The same practiced composure. Just calling to check in. How's the day? Fine. Dale came in about an hour ago. Oh, yeah? She kept her voice easy and conversational with considerable effort. Yeah. He said he brought me something better than a pie. Bobby paused. He brought me a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, which I told him was ridiculous and too expensive, and he said I wasn't allowed to argue. Cheryl smiled. Is it good? I wouldn't know. We're saving it for tomorrow, he says. Another pause. He says there's more to his visit than I think. He won't tell me what that means. Maybe he just wants to spend the weekend. Maybe. Bobby was quiet for a moment. He's up to something. I can always tell. He gets this look on his face like a man holding cards he thinks are better than yours. Is that a bad thing? Depends on the cards, Bobby said, and she heard something in his voice then, very faint, very careful, that she recognized as the sound of hope he was trying not to fully let himself feel. Daddy? She said. I love you. A pause. Love you too, sweetheart. She hung up and drove. The hill country held her in its dry gold light. Beside her, the coffee in the cup holder had gone cold. From the back seat, Tyler was playing a melody she almost recognized. Something slow and steady and built on simple chords. The kind of melody that didn't announce itself as anything special, but stayed with you long after it was done. She listened to it for a long time and didn't say anything. Some things were better left to breathe. They arrived in Uvalde at 7:45 as the last light was going red and low along the western edge of the sky. Cheryl had booked them into a modest motel on the edge of town. She'd thought about calling ahead to Bobby, maybe staying at the ranch, but the secrecy of the following morning required that she not be there when he woke up. The plan was to arrive at the ranch at 10, after Dale had gone through with a preliminary ruse that would get Bobby out to the back porch, their agreed staging ground. The motel room was clean and unremarkable. 2 queen beds, a small TV, a window that looked out at the parking lot, and, beyond it, the flat black outline of the hill country against the last purple light of the sky. Tyler set his guitar case against the wall and sat on the edge of his bed. "We're here," he said. "We're here," Cheryl agreed. "Tomorrow's going to be big." "Yes, it is." He looked at the window, at the dark country beyond it. "Grandpa's been out there for 3 years, mostly by himself." "Yes. And tomorrow this happens." "Tomorrow this happens." Tyler nodded. And then he lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling, and after a moment he said quietly, almost to himself, "I think Grandma would have liked this." Cheryl felt the tightening in the space between her ribs and her stomach. She sat down on her own bed and pressed her hands flat on the bedspread. "Yeah," she said, "I think she would have too." Neither of them spoke for a while. The air conditioner hummed. Outside, the hill country dark was total and deep and very still. Cheryl reached over to turn off the bedside lamp. "Tyler." Thank you for coming." "Mom." He sounded vaguely exasperated, the way teenagers did when they were covering something real with impatience. "Where else would I be?" She turned out the light. Bobby woke at 5:15. He lay in the dark for a moment longer than usual, something he almost never did, with his eyes open and the ceiling above him slowly resolving out of the dark as his eyes adjusted. The house was quiet. He could hear Dale's breathing from the guest room down the hall, slow and measured, the breathing of a man who'd always slept deeply and without apology. Something had shifted in him overnight. He couldn't locate it precisely. It was the kind of shift that happened below conscious thought. A change in atmospheric pressure, the way the air felt different before weather came in. He lay still and tried to examine it, and it moved away from examination, the way things did when you looked at them directly. He got up, made coffee, turned on the radio. "All My Exes Live in Texas." Dale appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30 in a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, holding the Pappy Van Winkle bottle. "Little early for that," Bobby said. "For looking at it? Never." Dale set the bottle on the counter and poured himself coffee. He was 69, a year younger than Bobby, and still had the posture of a man who'd spent his 20s playing guitar standing up. White-haired now, face deeply lined, but the same Dale Whitmore who had sat beside him in 7th grade math class with one ear turned toward the window and the AM signal. They sat at the kitchen table with their coffee. The morning light built up outside. Dale looked out the window with an expression that was casual, in the way that carefully managed expressions were casual, the effort visible to anyone who knew him. "Dale," Bobby said. "Bobby, what is it you're not telling me?" Dale turned to look at him, held his gaze. Then he smiled. That same poker hand smile Bobby had referenced to Cheryl the day before. The one he'd been seeing for 60 years. "It's a good thing," Dale said. "That's all I'll tell you right now. A good thing." Bobby looked at him for a long moment. "Cheryl's coming," he said. It wasn't a question. Dale didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. "She should come," Bobby said after a moment. His voice was flat and even, giving nothing away. "She should," Dale agreed. It's been too long. It has. Bobby looked down at the table, at the note card in Donna's handwriting. He'd left it there all week, which he hadn't meant to do. It had just stayed, the same way the other side of the bed stayed undisturbed, out of some habit of the heart he didn't fully examine. "I'm not angry at her," Bobby said. "I know that. I want her to know that. I've never been good at—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I've never been good at saying things out loud." "I know that too," Dale said gently. The radio shifted to something slower, the chill of an early fall. "She's a good person," Bobby said. "She was in a hard situation. I understood that. I understood it even at the time." He paused. "I just needed—" He stopped again. Dale waited. Bobby Callahan looked out at the September morning over his pasture. The leaning cedar post, the cracked trough, the permanent enormous sky. And for a moment, his face did the thing it almost never did in front of other people. It opened. "I just needed her to be there," he said. "That's all. I just needed someone to be in that room." Dale set down his coffee cup and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because saying nothing was sometimes the only honest response to something true. They sat with it for a while. The radio played. The light came in. "All right," Bobby said finally, in his regular voice, all the composure back in place. "What do you need me to do this morning?" "I need you to stay close to the house," Dale said. "I need you to be on the back porch at 10 o'clock. That's a specific request." "I have my reasons." Bobby looked at him, nodded once. "All right." At 9:45, Dale told Bobby there was something wrong with the fence post on the south side. He'd noticed it coming in the day before, and asked if Bobby could walk him down to take a look. Bobby gave him a look that said, "That's the fence post I've been meaning to fix for 2 months. And you know that." Dale held the look without wavering. Bobby got his hat. They walked out the back door and across the pasture, and the morning was bright and cool with a slight western breeze that moved the dry grass in slow, steady waves. The sky was the particular hard blue of a Texas September morning, cloudless and absolute. Bobby walked with his hands in his pockets, and Dale walked beside him, and neither spoke. At the fence line, they stood and looked at the post. "It's leaning," Dale observed. "Yes," Bobby said. "I know it's leaning. It's been leaning since April. We should fix that." Dale. The fence post is fine." Dale looked at him. "Give it 10 minutes." Bobby took off his hat and held it in both hands, looking back toward the house. The back porch was visible from here. The wooden boards he'd replaced 2 summers ago. The 2 chairs. The screen door that stuck in the frame. Ordinary and his. He waited. Cheryl's Subaru turned down the ranch road at 9:52. She drove slowly, the car raising a low wake of red dust behind it. Tyler was in the passenger seat now. They'd switched 2 hours ago when Cheryl's hands had gotten unsteady on the wheel, and Tyler had said, with the directness she was still adjusting to, "Mom, let me drive. You need to stop gripping the steering wheel like it owes you money." Now she sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and watched the ranch house come into view around the final bend in the road. The same as she remembered. The same as it had always been. The white wooden house with the green tin roof her father had put on in 2009. The big pecan tree in the yard. The barn beyond it, gone silver gray with weathering. She had been here 2 years ago, and it had felt wrong. The absence of Donna everywhere. The silences. The careful distance between her and her father that neither of them had known how to close. She was coming back now, and she was bringing something, and she was still terrified. Tyler pulled the car up and stopped. He put it in park and sat for a moment. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said. "Okay," he said, and got out of the car anyway. She followed him. Patsy Howell was already on the porch. She'd arrived 20 minutes earlier, under the pretense of dropping off something for Dale. She had the German chocolate cake in a covered pan on the porch table, and her eyes, when she saw Cheryl come around the side of the house, were full of something that Cheryl didn't let herself look at directly, because she was already close enough to the edge. "He's down at the south fence with Dale," Patsy said quietly. "They should be coming back up in a few minutes." Cheryl nodded. She stood on the porch and looked out at the pasture. There he was. Two figures at the fence line, small in the distance against the enormous sky. Even from here, she knew her father by his posture. Straight-backed and deliberate, the hat in his hands. She watched him turn to look back at the house. She wasn't sure if he could see her from that distance. Tyler stood beside her and didn't say anything. They waited. Bobby saw them when he was about halfway back to the house. Two figures on the back porch. One tall, one shorter. Even at this distance, something in his chest recognized the taller one before his eyes had processed the specifics. The way she stood, the particular stillness of it. Cheryl. He kept walking. His pace didn't change. Beside him, Dale had gone quiet in a way that was different from their comfortable quiet. A held breath. Bobby walked across his pasture on a Saturday morning in September under a hard blue Texas sky. And with each step, the figures on the porch came into sharper focus. And the feeling that had been with him since he woke up that morning, the shift, the pressure change, the sense of weather coming, swelled and clarified into something he could almost name. He walked through the back gate, across the dry grass, up the 3 porch steps, and there she was. Cheryl Callahan Reed, 39 years old, looking exactly like the child she'd been, and nothing like her at the same time, with Donna's dark eyes and 3 years of distance, and something in her face that was neither composed nor hiding anything. Raw and present, and there. "Hey, Daddy," she said. Bobby Callahan stood on his own porch and looked at his daughter, and did not say anything for what felt like a long time. Then he opened his arms. She came into them the way she'd come into them as a child, completely, without reservation. And he held her with his old hands and his calloused arms, and she was crying before she was all the way in. And he kept his eyes fixed on the horizon because that was the only way he could keep himself together. "You're here," he said. It was all he could manage. "I'm here," she said against his shoulder. Tyler stood slightly to the side, not intruding. But Bobby reached out with one arm and pulled him in too. And the boy came without hesitation. And for a moment, they stood there on the porch of the Callahan Ranch, with the sky enormous above them, and the pasture stretching out in all directions, and the old pecan tree moving in the mild western wind. Dale stood at the foot of the steps and looked at the fence line and blinked several times. Patsy Howell had her hands pressed flat together in front of her mouth, and her eyes were wet, and she was not making any attempt to pretend otherwise. Bobby released them and stepped back, cleared his throat, put his hat back on his head. "Well," he said. Then, "There's a cake." Patsy made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "There is a cake," she confirmed. "Is that Donna's recipe?" Cheryl nodded. "Patsy made it." Bobby looked at the covered pan on the porch table. He reached out and put his hand flat on the top of the cover for a moment, not lifting it, just touching it. And then he lowered his hand and looked out at the pasture. "All right," he said. Let's go inside." They were in the kitchen, the cake uncovered on the table beside the note card in Donna's handwriting, coffee in every hand, the comfortable noise of people filling a space that had been too quiet for too long. When Dale said, very casually, "Bobby, can we go back out to the porch for a bit? I want to show you something." Bobby looked at him. "There's a truck coming down the road," Dale said. "I want you to see it." Bobby stood up slowly. He looked at Cheryl, who had her eyes on her coffee cup. He looked at Tyler, who was looking at him steadily, with that observing expression, with what Bobby could now identify as barely contained anticipation. He looked at Dale. "Dale," he said. "Just come outside," Dale said. Bobby put on his hat and went outside. The truck came down the ranch road in a low cloud of September dust. A plain, dark pickup, nothing to announce itself, moving at the unhurried pace of something that had all the time it needed. Bobby stood on the back porch with his arms folded and his hat level and watched it come. Behind him, the screen door creaked as Cheryl and Tyler and Patsy and Dale came out one by one and arranged themselves on the porch and in the yard in the way people arrange themselves for something significant without being told to. The truck pulled to a stop in the yard. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Bobby Callahan, who had spent 40 years with this man's voice as a constant presence in his kitchen and his truck and the open space of his life, who had driven 3 hours to see him in concert twice, once in 1992 and once in 2003, who had owned every album, who had turned the radio up at the specific sound of that first guitar note in the same unconscious way other people reached for things they needed. Bobby Callahan stood very still on his porch and looked at George Strait walking across his yard. George Strait, 72 years old, in worn jeans and a button-down and a cowboy hat that was no different from the hats Bobby had worn his entire life, and a face that was the same face Bobby had seen on album covers for 4 decades, and a walk that was unhurried and easy, the walk of a man completely comfortable in the place he was standing. He crossed the yard and came to the foot of the porch steps and stopped. He looked up at Bobby. "Happy birthday, Bobby," George Strait said. Bobby did not speak. He stood on his own porch on a Saturday morning in September and looked at a man whose voice had been in his kitchen since 1982 and felt the world he'd carefully maintained. The orderly, managed, quiet world of a man who'd learned to carry things alone, shift in ways that were both immediate and permanent. He took off his hat. "Mr. Strait," he said. His voice came out steady. He was grateful for that. He stopped. "I don't quite know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," George Strait said, and stepped up onto the porch. He extended his hand. Bobby took it, and they shook. A real handshake, firm and direct, the kind that in that part of Texas had always been the primary language of respect. "I heard about you," Strait said. "Heard about your wife, about how long you've been a fan." He looked around at the ranch, the pasture, the barn, the mesquite along the fence line, the enormous sky. Beautiful place. "It is," Bobby said. "My father's land. And his father's before that. That means something." "It does." They stood together on the porch, and Strait looked out at the hill country for a moment in the way that people from that part of Texas looked at it. Not like tourists, but like a kind of recognition. Behind them, Cheryl had her hand pressed to her mouth. Tyler was standing very still. Patsy Howell had given up any pretense of composure entirely and was crying openly and without self-consciousness. Dale had his arms folded and was looking at the pasture with his jaw set and his eyes bright. Bobby turned. He looked at his daughter. "Cheryl," he said. She lowered her hand from her mouth. "Yeah, Daddy. You did this." Dale helped. "You did this," he said again. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet. "I know I owe you more than this," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I know this doesn't—" "Cheryl," he said it quietly, the way he'd said her name when she was small and had woken from a bad dream. A specific tone he wasn't aware he still had. "Come here." She came to stand beside him and he put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him the way she hadn't since she was a teenager. And they stood there on the porch together and looked at George Strait, who stood with his hands in his pockets, and the mild expression of a man who had lived long enough in the world to understand what a moment like this actually was, and to give it the space it needed. "Can I play you something?" Strait said. It was a simple question, offered without ceremony. Bobby nodded. He didn't trust his voice just then. Someone produced a guitar, a Taylor acoustic that had come in the truck, carried by Strait's driver, who had been so unobtrusive Bobby had barely registered him. The guitar passed through hands and came to rest in Strait's, and he held it with the ease of someone who has held a guitar for 50 years, the way an extension of his own hands. They had brought out chairs from the kitchen. The September sun was midway up the sky, warm without being harsh, the kind of Texas fall morning that occasionally fulfilled the promise of all the brutal summer months before it. The pecan tree moved slowly. Somewhere in the pasture, a mourning dove was calling. Bobby sat in the chair he always sat in, the one on the right side of the porch, the one Donna had always claimed had a better view, which he'd always agreed with so she'd take it, and which he now occupied himself with a mixture of habit and sorrow that he'd stopped analyzing. Cheryl sat beside him. Tyler was on the porch step, his long legs folded, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Dale and Patsy were on the other side, their chairs close together. George Strait settled into the remaining chair and set the guitar across his knee. He didn't announce what he was going to play. He just started. The opening notes of "The Chair" came off the acoustic guitar clean and unadorned, without studio production or a band behind them. Just the notes themselves, which Bobby had heard thousands of times in his kitchen on the radio, and which were entirely different to hear this way. Live, immediate, 3 feet away, played by the man who'd made them. Bobby sat very still. The singing started, and something happened in Robert Callahan that he would not have been able to describe to anyone afterward in a way that did justice to it. Not because he lacked the intelligence for it, but because some things happen below the register of language, in the place where the body holds what the mind doesn't know how to file. The music hit him there. It hit him in the place where Donna had lived, which was everywhere and nowhere. And it hit him in the place where 3 years of managed loneliness had been stored. And it hit him in the place where a son's pride keeps the things he's learned from his father. And it hit him in the place where the love for a child lives. The irreducible love that survives distance and hurt and time, and all the things that people do to each other out of their own fear and grief. He did not cry. Not exactly. His eyes went bright, and his jaw set, and he breathed carefully, and looked at the pasture beyond the porch rail, with the expression of a man absorbing something that required his full structural integrity to receive. Beside him, Cheryl was crying, not quietly, really crying, the way she'd been holding back for 3 years. The kind of release that happens when a person has held something so long that when it finally goes, there's no controlling the shape of it. She cried for her mother, and for the hospital, and for the years of distance, and for the store-bought birthday cards, and for everything she'd told herself was reasonable, and everything she'd known, beneath the reasonable explanations, was a failure of the only kind that mattered. Bobby reached over without looking at her and put his hand on top of hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. His hand was large and rough and warm, and she felt it, and turned her hand over and held it, and he didn't take it back. Tyler watched from the porch step, with the observing eyes that missed nothing, and he watched his grandfather and his mother hold hands, and the tears ran down his own face, and he let them. because there was nobody here who was not doing the same thing in their own way, and there was nothing wrong with that. Strait finished the chair. He looked at Bobby. "Another one?" he said. Bobby nodded. "Carrying your love with me." Halfway through, Tyler moved quietly back into the house and came out with his acoustic guitar. He sat back down on the porch step and, very softly, began to play along. His chord work was simple and slightly imperfect and absolutely sincere. And when Strait noticed, glancing over at the kid on the step, he smiled and adjusted slightly, giving the teenager room, the way good musicians give room. Bobby watched his grandson play along with George Strait on the back porch of the ranch that had been in his family for 3 generations, and the feeling in him was so complex and complete that it had no further edges to explore. It simply filled the space it occupied entirely. Donna. She would have said something about this. She would have had the words for it, the ones he couldn't find. She would have grabbed his arm and squeezed it hard the way she always did when something delighted her. A quick, fierce pressure that said, "Are you seeing this? Are you feeling this? Isn't this something?" And he would have put his hand over hers and squeezed back, and that would have been its own whole language between them. He looked at the empty chair on the left side of the porch, the one with the better view. "I see it, Donna," he thought. "I'm feeling it. It's something." After the third song, Troubadour, which undid Patsy Howell so completely that she had to go inside for 10 minutes and came back out with considerably less mascara and considerably more composure, Strait set the guitar aside and accepted a glass of sweet tea from Patsy's hand, with a thank you that was as simple and genuine as everything else about him. Bobby sat forward in his chair, with his elbows on his knees, and looked at the man across the porch. "I want to tell you something," Bobby said. "All right," Strait said. "My wife, Donna, she passed 3 years ago." His voice was steady. "She loved your music as much as I did, maybe more. Every birthday, she'd make a German chocolate cake from a recipe she'd been making since 1978. And we'd eat it in this kitchen, and there'd be George Strait on the radio, always George Strait. And that was all we needed. That was enough. That was everything." He paused. "I've got that cake in there today. First time since she passed. My daughter came home and had our neighbor make it from Donna's recipe. And you came. And..." He stopped. "And I just want you to know that this kind of thing, what you do, what your music is, it's not small. You understand what I mean? People say music is entertainment. And maybe it is, for some people, in some ways. But for me, it's been the thing that speaks when I can't. My whole life. And that's yours. You made that. And I'm grateful." The porch was completely quiet. George Strait looked at Bobby Callahan for a long moment. "Bobby," he said, "that means more to me than I can tell you. More than most things I've heard in a long time." He leaned forward. "The people who listen, the ones who really listen, who carry it with them the way you're describing, that's what it's for. That's always been what it's for. You just can't always see it from where I'm standing." He glanced at Cheryl, at Tyler, at the house around them. "You've got good people here." "I do," Bobby said. "You've got good land." "I do." "And you've got that cake." Bobby almost smiled. "I do." They ate the cake at the kitchen table. All 6 of them, crowded around a table that seated 4, with extra chairs brought in from the porch, and Patsy's generous portions filling mismatched plates. The cake was exactly right. Not precisely identical to Donna's. Nothing Patsy made would be precisely identical to Donna's, because the recipe was only part of what a thing tasted like. but close enough. Close enough to be a direct line back to all the birthday mornings before. And that was what it was meant to be. George Strait had a second piece, which Patsy treated as the highest possible honor, which it probably was. Dale poured Pappy Van Winkle into small glasses for the adults and told 3 stories from his and Bobby's shared past that Bobby pretended to be embarrassed by and clearly wasn't. Tyler asked Strait 2 questions about guitar technique that were specific enough to suggest he'd been playing seriously for some time, and Strait answered them with the detailed patience of a man who took the question seriously. Bobby sat at the head of his table in the kitchen where the radio always played, with his daughter beside him and his grandson across from him and his oldest friend at the far end, and Patsy laughing, and George Strait eating German chocolate cake in the chair where Donna used to sit, and the radio was playing through the small speaker on the counter. George Strait, inevitably, because Bobby had not turned it off and no one had suggested he should. Easy come, easy go, drifted through the kitchen the way light drifted through the window over the sink. Easy and unhurried and entirely itself. Bobby looked at the note card in Donna's handwriting, still on the table beside the salt shaker. He picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then he held it out across the table toward Cheryl. She looked at it, looked at him. "Keep it," he said. "I want you to have it." "Daddy, I've got it memorized," he said. "And I want you to be able to make it. For Tyler, when he's older." He paused. "For your kids, when you have them." Cheryl took the note card with both hands, the way you take something fragile and irreplaceable. Not clutching, just holding, with the full weight of attention. She looked at her mother's handwriting, the round, deliberate loops. The blue ink, faded but legible. The small notation at the bottom in different ink, added later, in a different year. "Don't forget to grease the pan." She laughed, a surprised, wet sound, and pressed the card to her chest. "I remember the story," Bobby said. "The first time she made it. The pan. We laughed so hard we knocked over the sweet tea. She told me that story," Cheryl said. "She told everyone that story." Bobby leaned back in his chair. She loved that story because it was the moment she knew. He looked at the table. "That was what she always said. That was the moment I knew." The laughing. The sweet tea on the floor. She said, "A man who laughs like that over a ruined cake is a man worth keeping." The table was quiet for a moment. The good kind of quiet. The kind that holds something rather than empties it. "She was right," Tyler said simply. Bobby looked at his grandson. The boy looked back with those clear, steady eyes. "She usually was," Bobby said. George Strait left at early afternoon, the same way he'd arrived. Without ceremony, without fanfare, just a handshake and a few words, and the dark pickup truck reversing out of the yard and back down the ranch road in its quiet cloud of dust. Bobby stood at the fence and watched it go. Dale came and stood beside him. They were quiet for a while. "You knew," Bobby said. "Back in October, that first phone call. You knew then." "I knew there was a possibility," Dale said carefully. "I didn't want to say anything until it was certain." "How long has Cheryl been working on this?" 6 weeks, maybe more." Bobby nodded. He watched the truck disappear around the bend in the road, the dust settling back down across the mesquite. "She sent a letter," Dale said. "An email. To his management. She wrote about you, about Donna, about the radio in the kitchen." He paused. "Dale, it was a good letter. She wrote things about you she'd never been able to say out loud." Bobby said nothing for a moment. "Did you read it?" he asked. "She read it to me on the phone," Dale said. "When she was writing it, she needed someone to tell her it was worth sending." Bobby looked at the fence line, at the leaning cedar post that was still leaning, because nobody had actually come out here to fix it today, and the fence post had merely served its purpose as a ruse. He walked over to the post and took hold of it with both hands and tested its lean. "This post needs a new anchor," he said. "It does," Dale agreed. "You want to help me fix it this afternoon?" "That's why I came," Dale said. Bobby looked at him. "No, it isn't." Dale smiled. "No, but I'll help anyway." Cheryl found him at the post an hour later. Dale had gone inside for tools, and Bobby was crouching at the base of the post, examining the ground around the anchor with the focused attention of a man who understood exactly what needed to be done and was simply taking the measure of the work before beginning. She came and crouched beside him. "It's the anchor that's gone," he said, not looking at her. "Post itself is fine, just needs resetting." "Okay," she said. A pause. "Daddy." I need to say it," she said. "I've been carrying it for 3 years, and I need to say it out loud." Bobby sat back on his heels. He looked at the post, at the dry Texas ground. He was quiet. "I should have been there," Cheryl said. "When Mom died, I should have been in that room. Nothing I had going on was more important than that, and I knew it. And I chose to tell myself it was complicated. And it wasn't complicated. It was just hard. And I was afraid. And I made the wrong choice. And I've known every single day since then that I made the wrong choice." Her voice held steady but barely. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry." Bobby looked at his daughter crouching in the dirt beside the leaning fence post on the land that had been in his family for 3 generations, and he saw in her face something that was entirely and unmistakably Donna's. The specific courage it required to say a true thing out loud. The refusal to protect yourself at the cost of what was real. "I know," he said. "I know you know. But I needed to say it. I know that too." He picked up a handful of dry dirt and let it fall through his fingers. "Cheryl, I held some things against you that I shouldn't have held as long as I did. That's on me." He looked at her. "You're my daughter. There's nothing that changes that. Nothing that makes it something less than what it is." "I'm going to come back more," she said. "Tyler wants to come back more. He loves it here. He loves you. I know he does. And She stopped. "I want to come home more, if that's okay?" Bobby looked at her for a long time. "Cheryl," he said, "this is your home. It's always been your home. That doesn't expire." He stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees. "You can come back whenever you want. You don't need to ask." She stood up beside him. She was tall, had always been tall from him, and she stood in the afternoon light on the Texas pasture with the dry grass around her ankles and the big sky above her. And for a moment, she looked like a child and like a woman and like her mother all at once. And Bobby Callahan felt the simultaneous presence of everyone he'd ever loved in the particular way that sometimes the landscape of an ordinary afternoon contains everything. He put his arm around her shoulders. "Come on," he said. "Let's fix this post before Dale comes back out here and tries to do it himself and makes it worse." She laughed, real and clean and entirely her own. "He's going to make it worse." "He always makes the physical labor worse," Bobby confirmed. "He's good for many things. Manual work is not among them." They were still laughing when Dale came back around the corner of the barn with the tools, which made him look at them both with great suspicion and only moderate offense. The afternoon stretched long and slow and golden, the way September afternoons in the hill country could when they chose to be generous. The fence post got reset, with minimal damage from Dale's contributions, and then there were cold drinks on the porch and Tyler playing guitar, and Patsy telling a story about the time she'd accidentally driven her truck into the Medina River in 1994 that kept getting more elaborate with each detail, and Bobby laughing at the parts he'd heard before just as much as the parts he hadn't. The light went amber. The shadows stretched. Bobby sat in his chair on the back porch, the one on the right, the one with the slightly lesser view, and looked out at his pasture and his fence line and the mesquite and the enormous darkening sky. He was aware, with a clarity that was not dramatic, but simply present, that this day had been something, that it would be a marker. Before and after this day, the way certain days in a life were markers. Not because of the impossible thing that had happened, though that was its own irreducible gift, but because of the simpler things beneath it. The hand held on the arm of the porch chair. The note card passed across the table. The words said out loud beside the fence post that had been leaning since April. The radio was still on inside. He could hear it faintly through the screen door. George Strait's voice, moving through the kitchen the way it always had, the way it had moved through this house for 40 years, on mornings with Donna, and evenings with Donna, and mornings alone and evenings alone, in seasons of fullness and seasons of loss, steady and present and entirely itself. Tyler came and sat on the step below his grandfather's chair, guitar across his lap, not playing, just sitting. "Grandpa," he said. Today was a good day." Bobby looked at the boy, at the sky, at the pasture going dark at the edges where the evening was arriving from the east. "It was," he said. "One of the best?" Bobby considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "One of the best," he said. Tyler nodded and was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I come back at Christmas?" "You don't need to ask. Mom said you'd say that." "Your mother knows me," Bobby said. From inside the house, Donna's cake was still on the table. 2 pieces left under the cover, which Patsy had insisted on preserving for the morning because you always needed something to look forward to with coffee. The note card was with Cheryl in the front pocket of her bag, carried with both hands pressed flat against it before she'd put it away. The way you carried the things that were not yours but had been given to you, which was its own kind of inheritance. Dale was inside helping Cheryl with the dishes, which meant he was talking and she was washing, and that was probably how that was going. The screen door creaked. Cheryl came out and stood in the doorway for a moment, drying her hands on a dish towel. She looked at her father in his chair, and her son on the step, and the darkening hill country beyond them. And her face had the look of someone who has set down something heavy, not gone from it, not free of it, but no longer carrying it alone. She came and sat in the other chair, the one on the left, the one with the better view. Bobby looked at her in it and didn't say anything. She looked back at him and didn't say anything either. They sat together on the back porch of the ranch that had been in the Callahan family for 3 generations, in the good September dark, with the cricket sound starting up in the grass and the first stars coming in over the hill country, and the radio played through the screen door. And Tyler sat on the step between them with his guitar across his lap and the long, quiet patience of someone who had his whole life ahead of him and was in no hurry. George Strait's voice came through the screen. "Ace in the hole. You're my ace in the hole." Bobby Callahan closed his eyes for just a moment. "I see it, Donna. I'm feeling it. It's something." He opened his eyes. The stars were coming out. The land lay still and permanent in all directions. His daughter was in the chair on the left, and his grandson was on the step, and his oldest friend was inside doing a poor job on the dishes. And the music was playing in the kitchen of the house, where the note card had been on the table for a week. And somewhere down a ranch road in a cloud of September dust, a truck was carrying something back toward the world that had sent it. a gift so unlikely and complete that it would live in the telling of it for the rest of their lives. He breathed in, he breathed out. 71 years old, on the land where he was born, with the people he loved, on the night after the day that George Strait came to his back porch and played 3 songs on an acoustic guitar for no other reason than because a daughter had written an honest letter, and the world had, just this once, been generous enough to answer it. That's enough, Bobby Callahan thought. That is more than enough. The screen door creaked once more, and Dale came out with his glass of Pappy Van Winkle and a look of complete satisfaction. "Left the last 2 dishes for whoever wants them," he announced. "Dale," Bobby said. "You're welcome," Dale said, and sat down. And the night came in full and soft over the Texas hill country, and the radio played on.